And I'm Phoebe, 32, and I never thought a family dinner would shatter my world. The crystal glass exploded against the wall, wine dripping like blood down the beige paint. My father's words hung in the air heavier than the silence that followed. You don't deserve any love. My hands trembled uncontrollably, but something inside me finally broke free. Years of secrets were about to spill out, and nothing would ever be the same. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our supportive community. Growing up in Mapleton, our house was the envy of the neighborhood. White picket fence, manicured lawn, and holiday decorations that won awards every year. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. My father, Jack Thompson, was a successful investment banker who provided well for us financially. My mother, Diane, was the quintessential homemaker who volunteered at school events and baked cookies that made the whole street smell like heaven. But perfect pictures often hide the deepest cracks. I always felt there was something off about my relationship with my father. While he smiled for family photos and attended my school events, there was always a coldness in his eyes when he looked at me. A distance I could never bridge, no matter how hard I tried. "Stand up straighter, Phoebe," he would say during family photos. "Tyler, you're perfect right where you are." Tyler was my younger brother by 3 years. He was the golden child, the son who could do no wrong. When Tyler brought home B grades, there were congratulatory dinners. When I brought home straight A's, there was only a nod and a quick, "as expected." I still remember my high school graduation. I was valedictorian, and as I stood at the podium delivering my speech, I searched the audience for my parents. My mother was there, tears of pride streaming down her face. My father sat beside her, checking his watch and scrolling through emails on his phone. "Your speech was lovely, sweetheart," my mother said afterward, hugging me tightly. "It went on too long," my father said already, walking toward the parking lot. "We're going to be late for Tyler's baseball practice." Despite the constant emotional neglect, I pushed forward. I graduated from Northwestern University with honors and landed a marketing job at a prestigious firm in Chicago. For a while, I had my own apartment, my own life, far away from my father's critical gaze. But then COVID hit, followed by company layoffs. At 32, I found myself doing the unthinkable, moving back into my childhood bedroom. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I found another position. My mother welcomed me with open arms, but my father made it clear I was an inconvenience. "Don't get too comfortable," he said as I carried my suitcases up to my old room. This isn't a permanent solution." Being back in that house as an adult gave me a new perspective. I started noticing things I'd been blind to as a child. The way my mother would flinch if my father raised his voice. The careful way she would phrase suggestions rather than direct statements. The constant checking to make sure everything was perfect before he came home from work. Tyler had moved to Seattle for a job in tech, so it was just the three of us in the house. The dynamics were strange and tense. My mother seemed to walk on eggshells constantly, and my father treated me like an unwelcome guest rather than his daughter. After 3 months of job searching, I finally received an offer from a marketing firm in Boston. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a solid position with growth potential. More importantly, it was my ticket out of my parents' house. My mother insisted on having a special dinner to celebrate, despite my father's obvious displeasure at the fuss. "It's just a job," he said dismissively when she mentioned her plans. Not like she's curing cancer. Still, my mother persisted, and that's how we ended up having the dinner that would change everything. My mother spent the entire day preparing for the celebration dinner. The dining room table was set with the good china we only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas. She made my favorite foods, roast chicken with rosemary, potatoes, asparagus, with hollandaise sauce, and her famous apple pie for dessert. "This is too much, Mum," I said, watching her rush around the kitchen. "Really, we could have just ordered pizza." "Nonsense," she replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "This is a special occasion. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." My father arrived home from work at exactly 6:30 as he always did. He barely acknowledged the special setup or the effort my mother had put into the meal. "I invited Susan from next door to join us," my mother announced as she placed the chicken on the table. "I hope that's okay with everyone." My father's jaw tightened momentarily, but he didn't object. Susan Williams had been our neighbour for over 20 years. She was a widow in her 60s who had always been kind to me growing up. She and my mother were close friends, though my father never seemed particularly fond of her. Susan arrived bearing a bottle of expensive red wine. "For the successful career woman," she said, handing it to me with a warm hug. The dinner began pleasantly enough. We all took our usual seats with my father at the head of the table, my mother to his right, me to his left, and Susan beside my mother. The food was delicious, and my mother kept the conversation flowing with safe topics. The weather, the new grocery store that had opened in town, Susan's garden renovations. "So tell us more about this new job, Phoebe," Susan said, genuinely interested. "What will you be doing exactly?" "It's with a boutique marketing agency called Apex Creative," I explained, unable to hide my excitement despite feeling my father's gaze on me. "I'll be handling their financial sector clients, creating campaigns for banks and investment firms." "That sounds wonderful," Susan said. "When do you start?" "In 3 weeks," I replied. "I need to find an apartment in Boston first. I've been looking online and there are some promising options in Cambridge." My father, who had been silently eating until this point, put down his fork with a sharp clink against the plate. "Boston is an expensive city. Have you considered the cost of living there compared to your salary?" His tone was condescending, as if I were a child who hadn't thought things through, rather than a professional with years of experience. "Yes, Dad, I've done a detailed budget," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "The salary is competitive, and while housing is expensive, I've found some reasonably priced options with roommates." "Roommates at your age?" he scoffed. "Sounds like you're going backward, not forward." My mother jumped in quickly. "Jack, Phoebe has thought this through. Let's be supportive." "I'm being realistic, Diane," he countered. "Someone has to be." The tension in the room was palpable. Susan looked uncomfortable, pushing food around on her plate. "Actually, I've been offered a signing bonus," I said, attempting to steer the conversation back to positive territory. "It will cover my security deposit and first month's rent, plus some new furniture." "Go." "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, her smile forced. "We're going to miss you terribly, but we're so proud of this opportunity." "Speak for yourself," my father muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. My mother's face fell, and Susan shot him a look I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't just disapproval, there was something deeper there, something that looked almost like knowledge of a secret. "Jack," Susan said, her voice carrying a warning. "What?" he snapped. "I'm supposed to pretend I'm thrilled she's moving across the country after we've supported her for months." "You make it sound like I've been freeloading," I said, feeling heat rise to my face. "I've contributed to groceries and utilities. I've done more than my share of household chores." "And that compares to mortgage payments, how exactly?" he shot back. "Jack, that's enough," my mother said, her voice unusually firm. "This is supposed to be a celebration." "Cartier." He turned to her, his expression darkening. "You always take her side. Always have, always will." "There are no sides here," my mother replied, but her hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. "Really?" My father's voice was getting louder. "Because from where I sit, it's always been you two against me, the perfect mother-daughter duo with your little secrets and whispers." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Mom and I don't have secrets from you." Something in his eyes changed, then a flash of something dangerous. "Don't you—" "Jack, please," my mother whispered. "Not now." "Then when, Diane?" he demanded. "When is the right time to discuss how you've both been deceiving me for years?" Susan placed a hand on my mother's arm. "I think I should go," she said quietly. "No, stay, Susan," my father said with a cold smile. "You're practically family. You've certainly been involved in family matters enough over the years, haven't you?" The atmosphere in the room had shifted from tense to frightening. I'd never seen my father like this before. His face was flushed and a vein pulsed in his forehead. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're ruining what was supposed to be a nice dinner," I said, trying to sound confident despite my racing heart. He turned to me, then his eyes narrowed. "You don't know what I'm talking about. Are you sure about that? Phoebe, are you absolutely certain you don't know why I've never been able to look at you without seeing betrayal?" Before I could respond, he grabbed his wine glass and hurled it against the wall with shocking force. The crystal shattered red wine splashing across the beige paint like blood. "You don't deserve any love," he shouted, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You never have and you never will." My hands began trembling uncontrollably. My mother let out a sob, covering her mouth with her napkin. Susan sat frozen, her face pale with shock that somehow didn't seem like complete surprise. I pushed back my chair and ran from the room, tears blurring my vision as I fled up the stairs to the safety of my childhood bedroom. Behind me, I could hear my mother crying and my father's continued angry outburst. As I slammed my door shut, I sank to the floor, wondering what terrible secret could possibly justify such hatred from my own father. Sleep was impossible after the dinner disaster. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's rage-contorted face and heard those devastating words echoing in my mind. "You don't deserve any love." Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep. The house was silent now. My parents' bedroom door had remained firmly closed since they'd gone upstairs around 10. I hadn't heard any shouting, but the silence felt just as ominous. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the collection of framed photographs on my dresser. They were mostly from my high school and college years, carefully selected moments of happiness. But now I found myself wondering if those smiles had been genuine, or just part of the perfect family facade we'd maintained. On impulse, I pulled out the storage boxes from under my bed. My mother had carefully preserved mementos from my childhood, and I suddenly felt the need to connect with simpler times before whatever secret my father had alluded to had poisoned everything. The first box contained elementary school art projects and report cards with gold stars. I smiled despite myself at the macaroni picture frame I'd made in 2nd grade and the poem about butterflies that had won a school contest in 4th grade. The second box held older memories, baby clothes, my first pair of shoes, and a small album labelled Phoebe's First Years. I opened it, expecting the familiar images of me as a chubby-cheeked baby that had been in our family album for as long as I could remember. But something was off. The photos were familiar, yes, but as I studied them more carefully, I noticed discrepancies I'd never paid attention to before. In the earliest photos, dated just after my birth, my father looked different somehow. His hair was styled differently, and he seemed thinner than in later photos. More strikingly, he appeared uncomfortable, holding me, standing stiffly beside my mother, rather than embracing his newborn daughter, as you might expect. Then there was a gap. Photos labelled as my 3rd and 4th months were missing entirely. When they resumed, my father looked more like the man I knew, and suddenly he was holding me more naturally, though still without the genuine affection evident in later pictures of him with Tyler. I flipped through hospital bracelets, my birth certificate, and early doctor's appointment cards. Everything seemed in order, yet something nagged at me. The timeline felt wrong somehow, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. Driven by growing unease, I crept downstairs to the storage closet, where my mother kept more family memorabilia. I needed to see the main family albums to compare them with the baby book and confirm that my suspicions were just stress-induced paranoia. In the dim light of my phone flashlight, I rummaged through the closet as quietly as possible. Behind the neatly labelled photo albums was a shoebox I'd never seen before, unmarked and dusty. Curiosity compelled me to open it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bound with a faded blue ribbon. The top envelope was addressed to my mother in unfamiliar handwriting, postmarked from Portland, Oregon, dated a year before I was born. With shaking hands, I slid out the letter. "My dearest Diane," it began. "Not a day goes by that I don't think of you and wonder how you're doing. Has Jack calmed down? Are you safe? Please know that my offer still stands. You can come to Portland anytime and I'll help you start over. You deserve better than living in fear." It was signed simply, "All my love, David." My heart pounding, I read through more letters. They told a story I'd never known my mother in an abusive relationship with my father. A friend named David, offering escape. My mother's reluctance to leave, despite the escalating control and occasional violence. And then I found it a letter dated 3 months before my birth date. "Diane, I understand your decision to stay with Jack, especially now with the baby coming. I hope he keeps his promise to change. Just know that whatever happens, I'll always care for you and your child. If you ever need anything, I'm here." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely refold the letter. This David had written about my mother being pregnant, yet the timing made no sense with what I knew about my parents' marriage. They'd been married for over 2 years before I was born, according to all the stories I'd heard. Beneath the letters were medical records. I hesitated, knowing this was a serious invasion of my mother's privacy, but I was too deep into this mystery to stop now. The records documented injuries: a broken wrist from falling downstairs, bruised ribs from a car accident, a concussion from slipping in the shower. All from the early years of my parents' marriage, all with the same doctor's notes expressing subtle concern about the frequency of accidents. The final document in the box stole my breath entirely. It was a paternity test dated 2 months after my birth, confirming that Jack Thompson was not my biological father. I sat on the closet floor, my mind reeling. The hateful words, the years of coldness, the constant criticism, all suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. I wasn't his daughter. I was living proof of something my mother had done that he couldn't forgive, yet he'd been forced to raise me as his own. But why? Why would a man like my father, so concerned with appearances and so clearly resentful, agree to raise another man's child? I needed answers, but I couldn't confront my mother directly, not after the explosive dinner. Instead, I decided to call the one person who might have some insight, my brother. Despite the late hour, Tyler answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Phoebe, is everything okay?" "Not really," I said, keeping my voice low. "Something happened at dinner tonight and I need to talk to you." I gave him a quick summary of the evening's events and my subsequent discoveries. "Jesus," he muttered when I finished. I was afraid this would come out eventually. My heart stopped. "You knew." There was a long pause. "Not everything, not at first," he finally said. "I overheard arguments when I was a teenager. Dad yelling about how Mum had trapped him, how he'd kept his end of the bargain, but hated every minute of it." "What bargain?" I pressed. "I don't know all the details," Tyler admitted. "But from what I pieced together, Mum was going to leave Dad before you were born. She'd met someone else and was planning to go away with him. Then she got pregnant." "With me?" I whispered. "Yeah, but not with Dad. The other guy was your biological father." The confirmation, even though I'd already seen the evidence, hit me like a physical blow. "So why did Dad stay? Why did he raise me?" Tyler sighed heavily. "Family reputation. Grandpa Thompson was still alive then, controlling the family money. There would have been a huge scandal if Mum left especially pregnant with another man's child. Dad couldn't risk being disinherited. So he forced her to stay," I said, the pieces falling into place, "and agreed to raise me as his own to avoid scandal." "Pretty much. But he's resented both of you ever since. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "It wasn't my secret to tell," Tyler said. "And honestly, I was afraid of what Dad would do if I brought it up. You've seen how he gets when he's angry." I thought of the flying wine glass, the decades of cold treatment, the medical records documenting accidents. "Does he hurt her, Tyler, physically?" Another long pause. "Not anymore, I don't think. But when we were kids sometimes, I saw bruises, heard things at night. Tears streamed down my face. And no one did anything. No one helped her. Mum always made excuses, said everything was fine. You know how she is always keeping up appearances." I thought of Susan's reaction at dinner, the knowing look she'd exchanged with my mother. "I think their neighbour Susan knows. She was at dinner tonight and something passed between her and Mom when Dad started getting angry." "Probably," Tyler agreed. "They've been friends forever. If Mum confided in anyone, it would be her." I wiped my eyes, a new determination forming. "I need the whole truth, Ty. I'm going to talk to Susan tomorrow." "Be careful, Phoebes," he warned. "This secret has been buried for 32 years. People don't like having their comfortable lies exposed." After hanging up, I sat in the dark closet surrounded by evidence of a family built on deception. The perfect Thompson family was a carefully constructed facade, and I had been an unwitting actor in the performance my entire life. I was no longer the same person who had fled to her room in tears earlier that evening. Now I had purpose. I was going to uncover every last detail of the truth, no matter how painful. And then I was going to confront the man who had made me feel unworthy of love for my entire life. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with questions. By 7 the next morning, I was watching Susan's house from my bedroom window, waiting for signs of activity. When I saw her retrieving her newspaper at 8:30, I quickly dressed and headed next door. She didn't seem surprised to see me on her doorstep. "I've been expecting you," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I imagine you have questions after last night." Susan's house was warm and inviting, filled with plants and colourful artwork, the complete opposite of our formal, pristine home. She led me to a sunny kitchen where coffee was already brewing. "Your mother called me early this morning," she explained, pouring 2 mugs. "She said you weren't in your room and your bed hadn't been slept in." "I was going through some old boxes," I said carefully, watching her reaction. "I found some letters from someone named David." Susan's hands trembled slightly as she set the coffee mug in front of me. "I see." She sat down heavily. "And what else did you find but medical records? A paternity test?" I met her eyes directly. "I know Jack Thompson isn't my biological father." She nodded slowly. "And you want to know the whole story?" "I deserve to know," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I've spent my entire life feeling like something was wrong with me, like I wasn't good enough to be loved by my own father. I need to understand why." Susan studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. You do deserve the truth." She took a deep breath. "Your mother and I have been friends since college. I watched her fall in love with your father, marry him, and then slowly disappear into his controlling world. She described how my father had isolated my mother from friends and family, how his charming public persona masked a jealous, controlling nature that turned violent when challenged. About 3 years into their marriage, it got really bad, Susan continued. Your mother had miscarried twice, and your father blamed her, said she was defective. That's when she met David. David Porter had been a literature professor at the local community college, where my mother had started taking classes in an attempt to reclaim some independence. They'd developed a friendship that eventually turned romantic. For the first time in years, I saw Diane come alive again, Susan said. She started making plans to leave Jack to move to Portland with David and start over. Then she discovered she was pregnant. My throat tightened. With me. Susan nodded. She knew it was David's baby. The timing made it impossible to be Jack's. When she told David, he was thrilled. He wanted her to leave Jack immediately before he could find out. But she didn't, I said, already knowing the answer. Jack found her packed bags before David could come get her. The confrontation was... Susan closed her eyes briefly. It was bad. He threatened to destroy both of them if she left. Said his family's connections would ensure David lost his job, that they'd never be safe anywhere. A chill ran through me as Susan described how my father had given my mother an ultimatum: stay and pass the baby off as his, or leave and face the consequences. She was terrified, not just for herself, but for you and for David. Your father's family had powerful connections, and this was before domestic violence was taken as seriously as it is now. So she agreed to his terms. She called David and ended things, told him it was better for everyone if he stayed away. But the letters, I said, he kept writing. For a while, Susan confirmed, until your mother finally convinced him she wasn't going to change her mind. She made him promise to stay away, that it was safer for everyone, especially you. I tried to absorb this information, this alternate reality, where my entire existence was built on coercion and threats. So my father agreed to raise me as his own, but he's hated me from the beginning because I'm living proof my mother loved someone else. It's more complicated than that, Susan said gently. Your father comes from a family where appearances are everything. His father would have cut him off completely if there had been a divorce, especially a scandalous one. So in his mind, your mother trapped him by getting pregnant with another man's child, forcing him to either accept humiliation or financial ruin. That's twisted, I whispered. It is, and it doesn't excuse how he's treated you. Nothing could excuse that. Susan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your mother has carried this guilt for decades. She's tried to compensate by loving you enough for both parents, but she's also been too afraid to leave him, too conditioned to believe she has no options. What about Tyler? I asked. Tyler is Jack's biological son, Susan confirmed. Your mother thought having another child might fix things, might make your father bond with both of you equally, but it only made the contrast in how he treated you more obvious. I thought about all the times I tried to earn my father's approval, all the achievements that had been met with indifference, all the years of feeling like I was fundamentally unlovable in his eyes. It hadn't been my failure. It had been his inability to see past his own resentment. Does Tyler know the full story? I asked. I don't think so, Susan said. Your mother tried to shield both of you from the ugliest parts of this situation. What about David? I couldn't help asking. Is he still in Portland? Did he ever marry, have other children? Susan hesitated. The last your mother heard years ago, he was still in Portland teaching at a university there. He never married. She thinks he never really got over her. I sat back processing everything. I have a biological father out there who might not even know I exist. He knows you exist, Susan corrected. He just believes staying away was the right thing to do based on what your mother told him. We sat in silence for a few minutes as I absorbed the enormity of these revelations. Then I stood up, my decision made. Thank you for telling me the truth, I said. I need to talk to my mother now and then, my father. Susan looked alarmed. Phoebe, be careful. Your father is not a reasonable man when he feels cornered. I'm not afraid of him anymore. I said, surprised to discover it was true. I've spent my entire life feeling like I was the problem. Now I know I never was. As I walked back to my parents' house, I felt a strange combination of grief and liberation. The family I thought I had never existed, but the truth, painful as it was, offered a chance for something I'd never had: freedom from the weight of earning a love that was never going to be given. I spent the day carefully planning my confrontation. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It needed to be deliberate and controlled. First, I texted Tyler explaining what I'd learnt from Susan and asking him to video call during the confrontation as both witness and support. Then I waited for the right moment. My mother had been avoiding me all day, staying in her room with the excuse of a migraine. My father had gone to his golf club as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. When he returned around 5, he sequestered himself in his study as he always did before dinner. At exactly 6 o'clock, I knocked on the study door. This was his sanctuary, the place where family concerns were brought for judgment. How fitting that it would be where I finally confronted him with the truth. "Come in," he called, sounding irritated at the interruption. I entered, closing the door behind me. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some document. He barely glanced up. "What is it, Phoebe? I'm busy." I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk, my phone propped up against a book so Tyler could see and hear everything. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady. "I want to talk about what happened at dinner last night." He sighed dramatically, removing his glasses. "Your mother already lectured me about losing my temper. If you're expecting an apology, you'll be waiting a long time." "I'm not expecting an apology," I said calmly. "I'm expecting the truth." Something in my tone must have alerted him that this wasn't the usual conversation. He studied me more carefully. "What truth would that be?" "Let's start with why you told me I don't deserve love." I suggested, maintaining eye contact despite my racing heart. That seems like a strange thing for a father to say to his daughter. His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." It was a comment made in anger. "Was it, or was it how you felt about me my entire life?" "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed, but I could see wariness creeping into his expression. "I found the letters," I said simply, "and the paternity test." The colour drained from his face. For a moment he looked genuinely stunned, then his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "You had no right to go through private papers," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Maybe not," I conceded. "But I had every right to know who I really am, why I've spent my entire life trying to earn love from a man who was determined to hate me from the moment I was born." "You don't understand anything," he snapped, standing up so suddenly his chair rolled back and hit the bookcase. "Your mother betrayed me, made a fool of me, then trapped me into raising another man's bastard." The ugliness of the word hit me like a slap, but I refused to flinch. "And you punished an innocent child for your wounded pride. Does that seem like the action of a good man to you?" "You want to talk about good men?" he snarled. "Your precious biological father wasn't so good. He seduced a married woman, got her pregnant, then abandoned both of you when things got difficult." "That's not what happened," I said, standing up to face him. "You threatened them. You forced Mom to cut him off to lie to him. You used your family's money and connections as weapons." "I protected what was mine," he shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "Your mother was my wife. I wasn't going to let some academic nobody steal her away." "She wasn't a possession," I fired back. "She was a person you claimed to love, yet you controlled and isolated and hurt her." "What kind of love is that?" He came around the desk, then looming over me. "You don't get to judge me. You have no idea what it was like having to pretend day after day, year after year, that you were mine. Having people comment on how you have your mother's eyes, knowing all along that nothing about you came from me. And that made it okay to make me feel worthless," I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "To criticize everything I did to withhold affection, to make it clear every single day that I wasn't good enough." "You weren't mine," he shouted, his face inches from mine. "Every time I looked at you, I saw him. I saw your mother's betrayal. I saw everything I had to sacrifice because of her mistake." "I was a child," I shouted back, tears streaming down my face now. "I was an innocent child who just wanted her father to love her. Do you have any idea what that rejection did to me, how it shaped every relationship I've ever had? How it made me believe deep down that I was fundamentally unlovable?" For a fraction of a second, something that might have been shame flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by the hard mask I knew so well. "You should be grateful," he said coldly. "I could have thrown your mother out, left her to fend for herself as a single mother in a town that would have ostracized her. Instead, I gave you a name, a roof over your head, and education, more than many men would have done. You did the bare minimum required to maintain your precious reputation," I said, disgust rising in me. "And you made sure we paid for your generosity every single day." The study door opened then, and my mother stood there, her face pale but determined. She'd clearly heard our raised voices. "That's enough, Jack," she said quietly. He whirled to face her. "You stay out of this. This is between me and the daughter you forced on me. No, my mother said, stepping into the room. Her voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. This has gone on long enough. 32 years of cruelty is enough. Cruelty, he echoed incredulously. I kept you in this house in comfort and security despite what you did. You kept me prisoner, she corrected, her voice shaking but clear. You isolated me from friends and family. You made me afraid to leave the house without your permission. You hurt me, Jack. Physically, emotionally, in every way a person can be hurt. And then you transferred that cruelty to our daughter. She is not our daughter, he roared. She is my daughter, my mother said firmly. And you agreed to be her father. The fact that you failed so completely at that role is on you, not on her. I had never seen my mother stand up to him like this. The shock of it seemed to momentarily rob him of speech. Mom, I said softly, reaching for her hand. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she replied, squeezing my fingers. I should have done it decades ago. I was too afraid then, too convinced I had no options. But I'm not afraid anymore. She turned back to my father. It's over, Jack. Phoebe and I are leaving. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And go where? Do what you have, nothing without me. No money, no skills, no prospects. You're 57 years old, Diane. Who's going to want you now? I don't need anyone to want me, she replied with dignity. I just need to be free of you. My phone chimed then, drawing everyone's attention to the screen, where Tyler's face was visible, watching the entire confrontation. Dad, Tyler said, his voice crackling through the speaker. Stop this. Now. My father's face contorted with fresh rage. You're all conspiring against me. My own son turned against me by these two. No one turned me against you, Tyler said firmly. Your own actions did that. I've been watching how you treat Mom and Phoebe my entire life, making excuses for you, telling myself it wasn't that bad. But it was. It is. And I'm done pretending. My father seemed to deflate suddenly, sinking back against his desk. For the first time in my life, he looked old and defeated rather than imposing. Get out, he said, not looking at any of us. All of you just get out. We intend to, my mother said, her arm now around my shoulders. Phoebe and I will pack some essentials and be gone within the hour. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the rest. As we turned to leave, my father's voice stopped us at the door. You'll regret this, he said, the threat clear in his tone. Both of you. You have no idea what I can do. I turned back to him, pity replacing fear. No, Dad. You have no idea what we can do now that we're not afraid of you anymore. We left him there, a small, angry man in a room full of expensive possessions that had never been able to fill the emptiness in him. For the first time in my life, I felt sorry for him. The next hour was a blur of activity. My mother and I packed only what we needed immediately: clothes, toiletries, important documents, and a few sentimental items. Susan had already offered her guest room until we could make more permanent arrangements. As we carried our suitcases downstairs, my father emerged from his study. He stood silently watching us, his expression unreadable. Where do you think you're going? He finally asked, as my mother reached for the front door. I told you we're leaving, she replied, not turning around. And I told you, you have nothing without me, he said, his voice dangerously calm. No money, no home, no future. We'll manage, my mother said, finally facing him. We always have. I'll freeze the accounts, Brielle, he threatened. I'll call every law firm in town and make sure no one will represent you. I'll tell everyone you had a mental breakdown, that you're unstable and need help. I stepped between them. Stop it. It's over. You can't control us anymore. Can't I? He asked, pulling out his phone. One call to my friend Judge Harrison and I can have your mother committed for psychiatric evaluation. One call to my golf buddy Tom at Boston First Bank and your fancy new job offer disappears. One call to my brother-in-law at the rental agency and you won't find an apartment within 50 miles of Boston. My mother paled and I felt a flicker of the old fear. His threats weren't empty. He did have connections, influence he could leverage to punish us. And one call from me to a journalist friend, came Susan's voice from the open doorway, and everyone in town will know exactly what kind of man Jack Thompson really is. She stepped into the foyer, phone in hand. I've documented everything over the years, Jack. Every bruise Diane tried to hide, every controlling tactic, every time you reduced your daughter to tears with your cruelty. I have dates, photographs, witness statements. I kept it all because I knew someday Diane would find the courage to leave, and when she did, you would try to destroy her. My father's face had gone ashen. You're bluffing. And try me. Susan said coldly. "I've been waiting 30 years to expose you. Don't give me the excuse I've been looking for." For a long moment, the four of us stood frozen in a tableau of decades-long conflict, finally reaching its breaking point. Then my father's shoulders sagged. "Take your things and go," he said, turning away. "But don't expect anything else from me. Not money, not support, nothing." "We never did," I said quietly, picking up my suitcase. "That's why we're leaving." Outside, the evening air felt fresh and clean, like the first breath after a long submersion. Susan hugged my mother, who was shaking with a combination of fear and relief. "You did it," Susan murmured. "You're free." As we loaded our bags into Susan's car, I saw movement at the living room window. My father stood watching, his expression a complex mixture of anger, loss, and something that might have been regret. Then the curtain fell back into place and he was gone from view. That night, in the safety of Susan's guest room, my mother and I talked more openly than we ever had before. She answered all my questions about David, about their relationship, about the early years with my father. She apologized again and again for not finding the courage to leave sooner, for not protecting me better from my father's emotional abuse. "I thought staying was the right choice," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought giving you a stable home, even an imperfect one, was better than running and always looking over our shoulders. I convinced myself you wouldn't notice how he treated you differently, that my love could make up for his coldness." "It wasn't your fault," I told her, holding her hands tightly. "You were a victim too. He isolated you, made you dependent, convinced you that you had no options." "But I did have options," she insisted. "Susan offered help so many times. My sister would have taken us in. I was just too afraid to take the risk." "That's what abuse does," I said gently. "It makes you afraid to trust your own judgment, to believe you deserve better." We cried together for the years lost to fear, for the relationship with my biological father that I'd never had, for the weight of secrets that had distorted our family for decades. "What happens now?" I asked when we'd both calmed down. "I don't know exactly," my mother admitted, "but for the first time in 35 years, I get to decide for myself, and that feels like freedom." The next few days were chaotic. My father made good on some of his threats. He froze the joint accounts, cancelled my mother's credit cards, and had his attorney send a threatening letter about taking everything in a divorce. But Susan's counter-threat held firm. When we didn't buckle, he gradually backed down. Tyler flew in from Seattle to help us navigate the situation. He confronted our father directly, making it clear that if he continued his vindictive campaign, he would lose his son as well as his wife and daughter. That finally seemed to get through to him. A week after the confrontation, my mother filed for divorce and requested a restraining order based on the history of abuse and recent threats. With Susan's documentation and Tyler's support, it was granted without difficulty. Meanwhile, I contacted my new employer to explain I would need a few extra days before relocating to Boston. To my relief, they were understanding and supportive. The job would still be waiting for me when I was ready, but there was one more thing I needed to do before starting this new chapter of my life. With Susan's help, I found an address and phone number for David Porter in Portland, Oregon. After much deliberation, I wrote him a letter introducing myself and explaining the circumstances of my birth and upbringing. I didn't ask anything of him, just offered the truth and my contact information if he wanted to respond. 6 months later, I was settled in my new apartment in Cambridge, enjoying my job at the marketing agency and building a life free from the shadow of my father's resentment. My mother had moved to Boston too, renting a small apartment near mine and taking classes at a community college, rediscovering interests and passions that had been suppressed for decades. The divorce proceedings were ongoing, but with a good attorney and the leverage of Susan's evidence, my mother was assured of a fair settlement. My father had finally recognized that fighting would only expose him to public scrutiny he couldn't afford. Tyler visited regularly, our relationship stronger than ever, now that the family secrets were out in the open. He had confronted our father about his treatment of both my mother and me, making it clear that any future relationship would depend on genuine remorse and changed behavior. "He's seeing a therapist," Tyler told me during one visit. "I don't know if he can change at his age, but he seems to realize how much he's lost." "Do you think he'll ever acknowledge the harm he caused?" I asked. Tyler shrugged. "Maybe someday. Right now he's still too wrapped up in his own pain to fully see yours. But he did ask how you were doing, which is something." I wasn't ready to forgive my father, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But I was no longer consumed by the need for his approval or wounded by his rejection. I was building a life based on my own values and choices, not seeking validation from someone who had never been capable of giving it. And then, one ordinary Tuesday in September, I received a letter with a Portland postmark. David Porter had written back. His letter was thoughtful and emotional, expressing shock at learning the full truth after so many years, deep regret at not being part of my life, and cautious hope that we might get to know each other now. He included a photo of himself, and I was startled by the familiar features I saw reflected there. My eyes, my smile, my hands. For the first time in my life, I saw physical proof of where I came from, biological connection that couldn't be denied or diminished. We began a correspondence that evolved into phone calls and eventually a visit. David was everything my father was not: warm, open, interested in me as a person rather than a reflection on him. He had never married or had other children, and meeting me was, in his words, the most wonderful surprise of my life. Through David, I gained a new extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, who welcomed me with open arms and marveled at the family resemblance they saw in my face. The hole that had always existed in my sense of belonging began to fill with new connections and unconditional acceptance. My mother, too, found healing in reconnecting with David as friends. Their romantic relationship was long past, but the care and respect between them remained, providing a model of healthy interaction I had never witnessed between my parents. As for my father, I maintained distance, but not complete severance. On the rare occasions when we spoke, usually regarding some practical matter related to the divorce, I was polite but firm in my boundaries. I no longer sought his love or approval, and that freedom was the greatest gift I could have given myself. In therapy, I worked through the deep-seated belief that I was unworthy of love, the legacy of a childhood spent trying to earn affection from someone determined to withhold it. I learnt to recognize my own worth, to build relationships based on mutual respect, rather than desperate attempts to prove myself. You know, my therapist said during one session, the most powerful response to being told you don't deserve love is to love yourself anyway, to recognize that the statement reflects the speaker's limitations, not your value. And slowly I did learn to love myself, to see the strengths and qualities that had nothing to do with earning approval and everything to do with who I truly was. The journey wasn't easy or straightforward. There were days when old wounds reopened, when childhood patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But with each challenge, I grew stronger in my conviction that I was worthy of love simply because I existed, not because I had earned it through achievement or compliance. My mother blossomed in her newfound freedom, developing friendships, pursuing education, and gradually healing from decades of emotional and physical abuse. Watching her transformation was perhaps the most beautiful part of our shared journey. I wish I had been brave enough to leave sooner, she told me once, but I'm so grateful we found our way out eventually. We got here exactly when we were ready, I assured her, and now we have the rest of our lives to live on our own terms. In the end, my father's cruel words at that fateful dinner became not a curse, but a catalyst, the breaking point that finally freed us from cycles of abuse and pretense. His declaration that I didn't deserve love revealed more about his own inability to love than about my worthiness to receive it. And in that revelation lay the most profound truth of all, that love is not something to be earned through perfection or compliance, but a fundamental right of every human being simply by virtue of existing. It took me 32 years to learn that lesson, but having learned it, I will never forget it again. Have you ever had to discover your own worth after someone made you feel undeserving of love? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video to help others who might be struggling with similar family traumas. Remember, you are worthy of love exactly as you are, and no one can take that truth away from you. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to create the family you deserve, whether related by blood or bound by genuine love and respect.